In the Shadow of the Valley by Maggot Moshpit, Chapter 20. It didn't take Miri long to realize she couldn't stay in the closet forever, as much as she wanted to. She wanted more than anything to just let the weight of everything push her into the floor, never to be seen again. Of course she couldn't. She'd read too many books. So she stopped crying, pulled herself up, and left, back to fulfill her duties. Troy was sewing along with a few others. She always marveled at the sheer amount of work that needed to get done regularly. Something was always torn, or new sacks needed, or flags patched up. She couldn't wait to get out of that place. She was about to get up when Miri entered. Troy was struck by her face. It held nothing but fatigue. Not a physical fatigue, but something that ran deeper. Her eyes were dull. She sat.
Hello.
Troy's voice seemed to dissipate before it reached Miri's ears. Miri picked up her work and began to sew once more. Troy tried to catch her eye, even waved to her, but she was almost catatonic. Troy sensed something was wrong. So wrong Miri had once again receded into her shell. Troy simply looked back to her work and tried to think of better times. She knew better than to try to talk to Miri. Maybe Redrick will help her, she thought to herself. Farrell was the most nimble of the crew, so he was sent up the mast to sit in the crow's nest. He perched there, the gradually accelerating winds pressing his ears flat. He saw nothing new, though the clouds in the distance had grown darker and now flashed with light. The sails billowed below him, but it was too early to see if they were gaining on the runaways. Farrell signaled down to the deck, his gesture received by Ziff. Ziff signaled back and moved to the front of the ship. He grabbed some nearby soldiers.
All right, I want you to get these ballistae loaded and ready. Prepare the catapult for range-finding shots.
With a myriad of salutes, the soldiers ran off to complete their tasks, readying the heavy weapons for battle. Ziff was worried, however, and as soon as he was satisfied everything was ready, he joined his two brothers in the cabin. They nodded to him, and all sat. Zip started by voicing the worry the other two were also contemplating.
At the speed we're going, the storm will hit before we have a chance to reach them.
Zick folded his paws together.
Then what should we do? Take down the sails and wait it out? Or chase them through the storm and risk wrecking ourselves?
We must chase them through the storm or we will lose them. We need to reinforce the mast with something and get everything tied down.
Zick and Zip nodded, Zip adding,
Let's just hope they don't think of the same thing.
Zick stood up and straightened his clothing.
Wouldn't matter. We have the fastest ship.
Zick and Zip exited the room with nods. Zick remained, slightly unsure. He had a strange feeling it would take more than speed to overtake that ship. Pill paused for about 2 seconds to ponder Cathresh's response before nodding.
I see. Classic case. I've seen this before many times. Yes. Totally normal. You meet a feline, discover he's not so bad, and fall in love. Yes, you're fine. Nothing wrong with you.
Cathresh sat in disbelief.
That's it?
Well, yes. Nothing more to talk about, really. A natural thing. Though I've yet to figure out fertility rates.
Cathresh shook her head in bewilderment.
Wait, you're saying everything that I've been taught is just wrong? And all the stuff people believe and kill people over is wrong?
Yeah.
I can't accept that.
Why not? Simple enough, isn't it? It felt right, so what's the problem? The only reason you felt bad is because some old guys decided it was a sin to be with other Etrians who happened to have a slightly different muzzle than you.
Drafraza decided to keep her children pure. That's what the texts say. No old guy decided anything.
Pill clasped the bridge of his muzzle.
I'm not going down that road right now. How about this? How do you know Drafraza wasn't mistaken in making your love forbidden?
That's blasphemous.
Pill raised his paws disarmingly.
Hear me out. Let me use an example. Say you created something out of wood. You have total dominion over that wood, and you carve your feline lover into it. But you get a little detail in his face wrong. What does the wood think? To the wood, you are infinitely more powerful than it is, so it assumes that you know what you are doing and that the mistake was intentional. Even after it sees the very thing that it was created in a likeness of, but clearly does not resemble. You know it was a mistake, but the wood does not think you can be wrong.
Kethresh looked at Pill like his head just transformed into a snake.
Huh? Wood can't think?
It was a metaphor. Look, what I'm trying to say is that even a supreme being can make mistakes. If they couldn't, your gods would all be at peace, right? Laroja, Drafasa, Denoka?
That made some sense to Kethresh. She stood up.
I'll think about that.
She went to leave, but Pill stopped her.
Hold on a minute. You need to tell me about this feline.
She frowned.
Why do you want to know?
I'm bored. It might help.
Kethresh didn't know if he meant it would help with her problem or to alleviate his boredom, but she sighed and sat back down.
All right. It was in the night. We were on a raid, and I stumbled into his house.
After Harimau had finished recounting everything that brought him to the ship, Bronn summed up his and his companion's journey. All the recently unslaved Oar Slaves were on the edge of their seats, and as the stories ended, they began murmuring to each other. Beale leaned back and exhaled.
Well, that's some journey, both you. I'd tell you mine, but we'd all be crying, and we don't want that.
Harimau noticed some of the slaves giving glances back to Garth. Harimau included him in the story, but left out Rita's involvement. Someone spoke up.
That lassie was right. We should throw him overboard.
There was general agreement. Harimau held up his paws.
Wait a minute. We don't touch him. Just leave him tied down and keep an eye on him.
Someone saluted.
Aye, aye, boss.
Harimau stood and motioned Beale and Bronze to do the same.
Let's see what's going on upstairs. Sounds like the wind's picked up.
Beale rubbed his arm.
I don't like the feel of this. I can feel a storm in my bones.
Indeed, when the three climbed on deck, the wind was howling, the sails billowing, and the sky darkening. Martin was looking out over the sea. The three joined him.
Hey, you guys. Isn't this weather great? This wind will get us to where we're going in no time.
Beale shook his head worriedly.
Sir, the mast wasn't built to stand this wind. It'll crack off if we don't get it down.
Harimau snapped to attention.
What? Then we need to get that sail down as soon as possible.
We can't!
The four wheeled around as Pill emerged from the cabin with Kethresh. He jumped all the steps, stumbled, fell, and got up in the same motion. He ran to the other side of the ship as the first drops of rain began soaking into his fur. They all joined him.
Why do they still have their sail up?
Bronze sighed.
I don't know the first thing about sailing.
Martin gave him a sideways glance.
Didn't you sail over to this continent?
I was sick the whole time.
Harimau folded his paws together and leaned on the railing. He pondered for a moment.
They know they can't catch us with their sails down, so they must be taking the risk. That means we need to, too.
Beale headed for the door again.
I'll warn my people.
Arbalest and Rita were still in the ship's armory. They looked over some splint mail, Arbalest taking some off the rack and donning it.
This is about as heavy as their armor gets. Those long tunics are what they usually wear.
Rita went over to the racks of tunics and began ripping off the badge of the army, which was sewn into each one. Arbalest walked over and watched with mild amusement.
What are you doing?
Those rowers had rags on. Would you stand idly by when you can properly clothe them all?
Arbalest couldn't argue there. He began to rip off the badges with her. It would be bad form to have the rowers wearing the symbol of their captors. They stopped their task when Rita keeled over comically. Arbalest offered a paw.
You all right?
She groaned.
This ship just doesn't want to stay still, does it?
He hauled her up, and she almost lost her balance again, having to be supported by Arbalest. He nodded.
Yeah, it's getting worse, too.
The boom of thunder shook the planks. Rita shrunk back against Arbalest. He could see the fear in her eyes, plain as day.
Drafreza is angry.
It's a storm. Let's get topside.
He grabbed two of the thick leather poncho-type garments, clearly meant for rain, handing one to Rita. She took it, but did not follow him towards the stairs. He looked back.
She's not angry at you. I bet you're a good little child of fire.
Rita loosened up a little and followed him up the stairs.
You're right. Though, this doesn't bode well for us.
Indeed.
As they walked through the short hall, Rita posed a question.
Speaking of gods, I always wondered who your kind worship.
Arbalest's smile turned lopsided.
We don't worship anyone.
Oh.
It was indeed raining out. Very hard. Martin was trying to keep the smaller sail under control, and he looked very flattened against the downpour. Arbalest grabbed the rope he was tugging on and lent a paw.
Where did this come from?
Martin did not have an answer. Rita ran to where Harimau was looking out over the sea.
I figured we'd be chased, but they're already so close.
They're keeping their sails up.
Isn't that dangerous?
Very. And we have to too if we're going to make it out of here.
Rita growled, then looked up at the main sail. It didn't move like the smaller sail, but it did strain against the rising wind and rain, screaming and protesting against the rope and wood that held it down. The ship rose on a massive wave, and Rita stumbled towards the edge, catching herself on the rail. As they came down on the other side, she heard a yell and looked up to see Martin flying through the air, clutching the rope still. All she could do was watch as he went flying into the main mast with a sickening thwack. Kethresh yelled something and lunged for him, but didn't reach him before the next sickening thwack as the smaller mast cracked in half and fell onto the larger one. Rita watched in horror as both came crashing down on Kethresh, Martin, and Arbalest. She rushed in to help moments after Harimau did, but before either could get there, a massive wave swamped the deck, swept them off their feet, and set Rita into something wooden and hard. Farrell watched the destruction on the other ship from the crow's nest, a smug look on his face. He yelled down.
Are you seeing that?
Zip barely heard his yell.
Yes! Excellent, isn't it?
Farrell chuckled as he watched a wave sweep over them. The felines below had been washed a few times by the salty waters, but they hadn't lost anyone. Something tickled at the end of Farrell's nose, but he ignored it. As the rain poured and the lightning boomed all around, Farrell didn't have time to stop and consider a nose tickle. He then smelled and tasted metal, the tickling moving to the rest of his body. He didn't know what the hell was going on, but he knew he had to get off that mast. He couldn't outrun lightning, though. Zip's grin quickly fled his lips as the ship was blinded by a radiant flash of light and the mast exploded into millions of tiny splinters. The sail flew off towards the horizon, looking like a ghost in flight. Everyone hit the deck, including Zip. His injured arm protested as he fell upon it, but he ignored it as he was showered in bits of wood. Something heavy fell next to him, and a few moments after the commotion ended he opened his eyes, only to see the charred remains of Farrell. He cursed and sprang up.
Everyone up! Check the remaining sail, and someone throw this body overboard!
Zick flew out of the cabin, furious.
What the hell happened?
We were hit by lightning!
Someone yelled. A frantic-looking Ziff came up from below decks.
The rudder's gone!
Zip and Zick wheeled on him and yelled in unison.
What?
The shock from...
He looked around.
I'm guessing lightning. Snapped it off somewhere.
Sure enough, the wind and sea pushed the snapped rudder, still in control of the ship, to the right, and sent them in circles. Zick darted back inside, predicting what his brothers were thinking.
I'll get it fixed as soon as possible.
Zip cradled his arm as he looked out over the sea, watching the silhouette of the other ship slowly getting smaller. He dug his claws into the wooden rail. Later that day, Miri had not changed positions much at all, and was still sewing away apathetically. Troy had stopped fretting about her for the time being, and became lost in thoughts of her own. The slaves working on clothes not only had to sew and repair, but also thread iron into some clothes for protection, among other difficult tasks. Her work was interrupted by a loud shout from outside.
Fire! Fire in town!
A soldier dashed around the corner and stuck his head in the room.
You lot, get out here and follow me.
He pointed down the hall.
Join the other slaves and grab a bucket. We've got to stop this before it spreads.
None of the slaves wanted any of their friends and family burned, so they quickly abandoned their tasks and went to join the others. Troy jumped up, worry quickly instilling itself in her chest. She joined the others. Miri stood also, deciding to put aside her misery for the moment. She was the last to the door, but the soldier stopped her.
Not you. The Regent says you stay in this room. He doesn't want you anywhere near the town.
His assistance needed elsewhere. He simply closed and bolted the door from the outside. Miri stood inside in shocked silence, then sat down again. Of course the Regent couldn't risk her talking to any of the townsfolk. In fact, she was surprised he still let her be with the slaves. She could easily spread the word about the Regent's true nature, and maybe stir up some trouble. But then something dawned on Miri. She wasn't going to. The entire day, what had she been doing? Nothing, and the Regent knew it. He wasn't stupid. He knew how she handled stress. By shutting down, blocking the world out, and not confiding in anyone. He thought he had broken her spirit, and that he could let her be among the slaves safely, and he was right. She wouldn't say anything. She wouldn't stir trouble. She wouldn't expose him to anyone, because she had given up. Miri, however, still held on to some hope. Martin. She wanted to see him so much, it was the only thing keeping her on her feet. Although she'd given up, she knew others hadn't. Troy was one of them. Troy ran towards the fort gates, which lay opened. She had a thought, and looked back for Miri. She skidded to a stop when she saw the empty hallway. The commotion ahead of her was so all-encompassing that she felt confident no one would notice if she slipped away to find Miri. She returned to the room she had just come from, and found it locked from the outside. Puzzled, she opened it and peered inside. Miri sat, eyes watching a horizon, thousands of miles away.
Miri, why is the door locked?
Miri looked up slowly.
I'm going to tell you something, and then you're going to walk out of that door and help put out the fires.
Troy was a little surprised she responded, and for a moment she just stood there. Miri raised an eyebrow. Troy stammered a response.
Sure, Miri. Anything.
Your father lied to you. He lied to the entire town. He didn't see anything. Frey didn't touch me. He was a good man, a hero, and should have died a martyr.
Troy was about to laugh, automatically assuming it was some sort of dark joke. However, the solid expression on Miri's face told her she was being deadly serious.
What? Why would he do such a thing?
The accusation alone was enough to bring tears to Troy's eyes. Miri pointed to Troy.
You. He did it for you.
He...
Troy found her voice missing. Miri lowered her finger and looked away from Troy.
Well, that's my guess, anyway. The only reason I can think of is because you were being used as leverage.
Troy stood in shocked silence for a long time. Eventually she spoke.
And you know all this? I mean, it wasn't Frey?
Miri closed the distance between them and grasped Troy's arms.
Of course it wasn't. It was him. The Regent. He's responsible. Not Frey. Talk to Halen.
Miri then returned to her seat, picked up her needle, and returned to sewing. Troy wiped the tears from her eyes and slowly retreated from the room. She relocked the door and walked back to where she was supposed to be. In town, the fire reached towards the sky, surprisingly high. The building that was on fire was not a house, but a workshop. An offshoot of the smithy, but a separate building, the workshop was where hilts were fitted to weapons, among other things. Since there was no metalworking in the workshop, it was made of wood and not stone. It was half destroyed before the slaves approached to throw water. The adjacent house was evacuated, and it looked like the fire might spread. Halen was on the scene, along with many others, slinging water from a bucket line that had quickly formed from the town well. As he worked, Troy suddenly appeared at the end of the line and handed him a bucket. He stopped for a moment to acknowledge her, then went right back to work. He couldn't help but notice the strange look about her. He knew that look. Something was bothering her. The battle was hard fought, and on a few occasions it looked like the fire would spread. But the constant, albeit little, assault of water kept the left side from spreading. Eventually the structure collapsed in on itself, and there was no longer any risk of it spreading to the next building. Everyone collapsed where they were, exhausted and relieved. It was midnight. Halen and Troy sat next to each other.
How are you, Troy? Holding up okay?
Yes, I don't think I'm burned.
No, I mean up there, in the fort. They treat you all right?
Yes, Father. I'm fine.
He nodded contently, then sat back in the snow, his elevated temperature melting it a little. They sat in silence for a while, the area filled with chatter and soldiers shouting orders. Troy looked at Halen.
Tell me something.
Yes?
You lied about Frey, didn't you?
Halen shot up.
What? No, I...
She slapped him.
You selfish ass! Why do you think I would have wanted you to put my life over Frey's? Why do you think I would have wanted Miri to go about justice?
Halen pulled Troy into a hug as she started sobbing.
I'm sorry, child. Believe me, I'm sorry. I don't know how you figured it out, but I had no choice.
Of course you had a choice. You could have not done anything.
Halen hugged her tighter.
I figured if I didn't help, he would take you away from me, and then find a way to clear his name anyway. You need to understand the pressure I was under. Please, forgive me.
Troy didn't say anything. Halen continued to hold her and began stroking her head. Eventually, she calmed down.
I get why you did it. I'm just saying you were wrong.
Maybe I was.
Troy felt very warm and comfortable. She hadn't been this close to her father since she was a kid, and it was very difficult to stay angry with him. She decided to be disappointed in him, and leave it at that.
You still need to fix things.
Halen looked down at her.
Fix things? How?
I don't know. Mary is ruined, though. She won't talk. She did earlier, to tell me all this, but she's been silent all day.
Halen felt guilt burn his insides.
Fuck.
Troy hit him.
Language.
Sorry. It's a real screwed up thing I did, I know. And I do need to atone. But what can I do? I've told these people the Regent is good, and they believe me. Even if I could convince them, I don't want to start a rebellion. We'd be slaughtered.
You don't have to directly fight them. Just, I don't know, resist?
I might have an idea.
It was a hell of a night. After both masts fell, things became difficult. They were totally at the mercy of the waves, getting pushed off course in no time. This was, however, not their first concern. The three trapped under the mast were, as well as the gaping hole left in the deck from where the mast had fallen. Harimau was just getting up from the wave when Kethresh yelled.
We're taking on water!
He looked through the darkness and rain at the hole. Water washing from the ocean and rain was pouring in. He could see someone at its edge. He rushed over, being joined by Kethresh.
It's Bronze!
He was clutching his side.
I'm fine! I'm fine!
Get him below and tell the rowers to start bailing.
Martin was getting up off the deck from under the heavy canvas, pushing it off him despite it being heavy with rain. He stumbled to Harimau, coughing and gasping, clearly winded. Harimau grabbed him before he could fall.
Whoa, here, rest a moment.
He sat Martin down. He spotted white.
Rita!
She was out cold. He scooped her up and brought her below. There was a hive of activity down there, as rowers grabbed any vessel they could get their paws on and began scooping water and carrying it up the stairs to be thrown back into the sea. Harimau laid Rita out in the corner and checked her breathing. Her breath was labored. He checked her over and felt something strange just under her left breast. He guessed it might have been a fracture to her rib. He grabbed one of the rowers as they passed.
You, watch her please. If she wakes up, take care of her and give her what she wants.
The rower nodded and sat down, glad for something else to do than bailing. Harimau rushed back upstairs. Kethresh was attempting to free Arbalest, who was trapped under the mast itself. She tugged at the mast as he yelled at her.
Hurry! Don't let it drop anymore, or it'll snap my leg in half!
Harimau was about to lend a paw, but with a yell of pure determination, she lifted the mast enough for Arbalest to scuttle out from underneath. Harimau and Kethresh bore him down into the ship. Pill was dancing around the deck, too excited to do anything useful. He shouted to the rowers.
Hurry! You don't want to know what dying of hypothermia feels like. It's like slowly slipping away into an icy sleep you'll never wake up from. Bail faster, friends!
In half an hour, the line became more organized, and water was being bailed at an alarming rate. However, the ship still filled slowly due to the heavy rain and relative shallow bowls the escapees were forced to use. They could not keep up. Harimau saw this and went to set his mind to a solution. He didn't come up with one before Rita woke up. When she did, she winced in pain.
What?
She cried out in pain as she tried to speak. The rower sat up.
You're awake!
Rita pointed to her rib. The rower nodded.
Yes, cracked. Happened when the mast fell. Take shallow breaths and don't move.
Rita, of course, did not comply. She sat up, her face screwed up in pain as she did. The rower tried to push her back down, but Rita slapped her paw away. She frantically pointed towards the stream of balers and rising water. The former slave nodded.
Yes, we're taking on water.
Rita pointed towards the door.
Take me!
The slave hesitated, then remembered what Harimau said. Not seeing him in sight, she helped Rita to her feet, and they ascended the stairs. As they reached the top step, which was actually several inches off the deck, to prevent any water flowing down the stairs, Rita adjusted her arm around the rower's shoulder. She croaked.
Name!
Me? I'm Petal, like a flower. What about you?
Rita!
Nice to meet you, Rita. Where are we going? We couldn't help them from anywhere else on the ship. There's just the armory and the cabin.
Rita pointed to the armory. Petal shrugged and helped her walk across the water and windswept deck. They entered the armory, and as soon as they did, Rita pushed away from Petal. Clutching her chest, she walked through the hall, past Drafrace's dagger, and down the stairs into the water below. Although there was a wall separating the armory and the rowing section, it was not watertight. She started grabbing rain garments.
What are you doing?
Petal asked. Rita pointed to another wall. Tools sat in a chest.
Nails!
She said. Petal looked from the nails and hammers to the rain garments she was collecting, then snapped her fingers.
I get it. Excellent idea. Here, let me help.